All right, today we're tackling a really powerful, and let's be honest, pretty controversial argument about the H-1B visa program. We're going to break down one author's case, piece by piece, to really get why they believe the whole system is a scam. So let's jump in. Yeah, the author of our source material does not pull any punches. This one sentence is pretty much the core of their entire argument. So our job here is to figure out exactly how they get to such a strong claim and see the case they build.
Okay, so a scam on the economy. That's a huge claim. Where does it even come from? Well, according to the author, it all starts with completely reframing what the H-1B program is actually being used for today.
And this is really the heart of it. The author basically says that the story we've all heard about the H-1B, bringing the best and brightest to the U.S. is, well, a myth. They argue that its main job now has become something totally different, a pipeline for outsourcing American tech jobs with a specific focus on India. Okay, but an outsourcing pipeline, what does that even mean? It sounds kind of complex, right? But the author actually lays out a very specific step-by-step process they believe is driving this whole thing.
So here's how it supposedly kicks off. Big US tech companies, they go and build these massive centers in India called Global Capability Centers, or GCCs. And then they move entire departments. We're not just talking about a few jobs, but whole teams over to these centers. The author argues that that is the key first move that sets up the rest of the pipeline.
All right, so this slide breaks down the four-step process the author is alleging. Let's walk through it together. First, a US company shifts an entire department over to its Indian GCC. Then, step two, a related job opens up back here in the States. But, and this is the key part, instead of posting it for everyone to see, the company supposedly jumps to step three. They only recruit from their own team over at that Indian center. The person they pick gets an H-1B visa, comes to the US, and then step four, they help funnel even more work back to the team in India. The author's point is that it's the self-feeding cycle, designed specifically to replace American jobs.
This brings up an obvious question. Why wouldn't they just post a job in the US? Well, the author claims that to these companies, hiring locally is just a huge, expensive hassle. It's way faster, way easier to just grab someone from their own pre-screened group of employees in India. And just like that, the entire American job market gets bypassed.
Okay, so this is where the argument really ramps up. The author isn't just saying this is some kind of clever business loophole. No, they're making a much heavier claim, that this whole system is flat out illegal.
So, to get why they're making that accusation, you have to know about this specific law, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is a huge piece of federal legislation, and the important part for this argument is that it makes it illegal for employers to discriminate based on someone's national origin. That specific rule is the legal bedrock for the author's entire claim. And here it is, the legal argument in the author's own words. What they're saying is that by only recruiting from their Indian centers for jobs that are physically in the US, these companies are creating a system where the one and only real requirement becomes having an Indian passport. And the result? They claim that perfectly qualified US citizens are just being ignored for a job in their own country. The author argues that's a textbook case of illegal discrimination.
And that leads to a pretty shocking conclusion. The logic here is pretty straightforward. From the author's perspective, if the hiring process itself was illegal because it was discriminatory, then any visa you get from that process is basically void. So, in their eyes, that visa holder is in the US illegitimately, right from the very beginning. And just to show you how seriously they take this, the author makes this really direct comparison you see on the slide. They're saying that an H-1B worker who got their visa through this allegedly discriminatory system is just as illegal as someone who crosses the southern border without any visa at all. I mean, that is an incredibly provocative claim, and it's clearly meant to drive home how severe they believe this problem is. So putting the legal argument aside for a second, the author then zooms out and talks about what they see as the disastrous long-term effects this could have on America's whole tech industry.
And yeah, they paint a really bleak picture. They're arguing this system is wiping out thousands of US tech jobs, that it's choking off the career path for new American STEM grads because they can't get those all-important entry-level jobs to build experience. And over time, the author claims, this hollows out our own talent pool, making the US more and more dependent on other countries for technology, even for stuff that's critical for national defense.
All right, to bring their whole argument home, the author shares a personal story, an anecdote from social media, and they use it to show you where they're coming from personally, and also to set up the solution they're about to propose. So the story is set during what the author calls a flame war on X. You know, the platform that used to be Twitter. This online fight is basically the backdrop they use to state their case very clearly and to justify the big policy change they want to see.
And in this quote, the author lays out their own motivation. They try to frame their position as not being anti-immigrant, but pro-competition. They're saying, hey, all I want is for every job to have an open, fair competition, and for companies to hire legally. Their stated goal is just to get employers to follow the law.
So that was the response they got. Just a short, dismissive, really sick response. And the author points to this exact reply as the kind of attitude that proves, in their mind, that we need a drastic change.
So what's the big solution? What does the author think we should do about all this? Well, they suggest hitting companies where it hurts, their wallets. The idea is to slap a massive fee increase on H-1B visas. The hope is that this would force companies to think twice about their hiring and, as the author puts it, clean up the H-1B program.
And they're not talking about a small increase here. They name a very specific number, $100,000 per visa. I mean, that's not a tweak. That's a figure so high it would completely change the math for any company using the H-1B program. And this last quote really ties a bow on the author's entire argument. They clearly see this as a deliberate scheme to get around U.S. laws, one that's doing serious economic damage. And it's that passionate belief that leads them to call for such a radical solution.
And that really brings us to the end of this deep dive. The claims we've just unpacked are pretty intense. The accusations are serious, and it all seems to boil down to this one central question you see here. At what point does a company's hiring preference cross the line and become illegal discrimination? As this whole debate over visas and immigration keeps going, that's really the question at the core of it all. Thanks for watching.